Have you ever looked at the world of finance and felt like you're only seeing the surface? You know, like a currency makes a wild move over here, the stock market does something weird over there, and you just get this feeling that it's all connected in some way, part of a bigger game being played behind the scenes? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a theory that tries to connect all those dots.
So let's jump right into the puzzle. You've got the Japanese yen, the US dollar, and a supposed secret meeting at Mar-a-Lago. Now, at first glance, those things seem totally unrelated, right? But the theory we're digging into today suggests they are absolutely connected, pieces in a giant, high-stakes chess match designed to unwind one of the most popular and riskiest bets in the entire global financial system.
And at the absolute center of this whole story is something called the yen carry trade. Now, for years, this trade has been like rocket fuel for global markets, but our source sees it as a ticking time bomb, just waiting to go off. And the scary part is, the countdown might have already begun.
The wild thing about this trade is just how simple it is. See, for decades, Japan has kept its interest rates pinned down to almost zero, and that made it incredibly cheap for the big players. We're talking hedge funds, major banks, to borrow just massive amounts of yen. It was basically like getting free money to go play with.
So here's the playbook. It's pretty straightforward. Step 1, you borrow a ton of yen for next to nothing. Step 2, you immediately sell those yen to buy US dollars. This, by the way, is what's been pushing the yen's value down for so long. Step 3, you take all those dollars and plow them into US assets that have been on an absolute tear. Think big tech stocks or government bonds that pay way higher interest. It's a trade that has helped pump up US markets for sure. But it also creates this massive hidden vulnerability.
So, what's the catch? Well, the whole thing works only as long as everything stays calm. The big risk is what happens if something, anything, forces all of these investors to reverse the trade at the same time. I mean, they'd have to sell their US assets and scramble to buy back yen to repay their loans. It would be like a fire alarm going off in a crowded theater with only one tiny exit, just pure chaos.
And that brings us to the big question. What could possibly trigger such a massive, coordinated stampede for the exits? Well, the source material we're looking at puts forward this really fascinating and, speculative theory, a secret backdoor agreement they've nicknamed the Mar-a-Lago Accord.
This quote right here really gets to the heart of the whole idea. The theory is that there's this coordinated, behind-the-scenes push by the US and its allies, potentially including Japan, to deliberately and systematically weaken the US dollar. Why? To achieve some very specific geopolitical goals. It's a huge claim, I know, but if it's true, it would explain a lot of the really strange stuff we've been seeing in the markets lately.
And this isn't just some random idea. The theory lays out some very specific objectives. The number one goal is to weaken the dollar. That makes American exports cheaper for the rest of the world, which helps shrink that huge trade deficit. And in return for other countries helping out, say by buying up massive amounts of US debt to keep our borrowing costs low, the US offers things like security guarantees. It's basically using financial policy as a tool of global power.
Okay, so is there any actual proof of this, or is it just a wild theory? Well, the source material argues that there's a trail of clues, a checklist of signals that they believe point directly to this secret accord being put into motion right now. So get this. The person who came up with this theory laid out 9 specific signals to watch for. A little while ago, 6 of those 9 signals were flashing green. But as of a recent update, that number has jumped to 8 green signals and 1 yellow. To them, this suggests that the odds of this accord being real are getting higher and higher.
All right, signal number 1, and this is a big one. What officials are actually saying out loud. For the longest time, it was just radio silence. But just recently, Japan's top finance official came right out and confirmed that they were considering a currency intervention as part of a US-Japan agreement. That is a huge shift in language and a major green flag for this theory.
Then you've got signal 2. You know all that panic you hear about foreign countries like China dumping US debt? Well, the data from the actual bond auctions, according to this source, shows the exact opposite is happening. Foreign demand for US government debt is incredibly strong. And that fits perfectly with the idea of a coordinated deal where our allies agree to keep buying our debt.
And signal number 3 is all about following the smart money. Just look at gold. It has been on an absolute tear, crushing the stock market. Now, this is a classic defensive play. When big investors get nervous about something, especially the value of a currency,
they often pile into gold. It's a sign that they're getting ready for a major shift in the markets. And the theory even lays out a whole roadmap for how this accord might unfold, broken down into 4 phases. According to the analysis, we're already past phase 1, where all the quiet signals started to appear. They believe we're now at the very end of phase 2, which is a period of stabilization. And that puts us right on the doorstep of phase 3, where central banks might start to openly talk about their coordination.
And this is where it all comes full circle. This is how we connect this secret accord directly back to that ticking time bomb we started with, the yen carry trade. And we're going to see how the fate of the US dollar is right at the heart of the entire thing.
The source points to this right here as the potential smoking gun. Look, normally when US interest rates go up, it makes the dollar stronger. Simple, right? But lately, we've seen something really strange. US rates have been rising, but the dollar has actually gotten weaker. That just doesn't make sense with traditional logic, and it points directly to some kind of a stealth intervention happening behind the scenes.
So here's the chain reaction this accord could kick off. First, the policies from the accord start to deliberately weaken the dollar. As that happens, the yen carry trade suddenly becomes unprofitable, or worse, it starts losing money. That forces investors to panic. They have to sell their US assets and rush to buy back yen to pay off their loans. That massive rush to buy yen makes its value skyrocket, which makes the dollar fall even faster. And that, my friends, is the reverse carry trade.
And listen, this isn't just theory anymore. Just recently, we got reports that both the Bank of Japan and the New York Fed were doing something called rate checks. That's basically them calling up the big banks and asking, hey, what's the exchange rate right now? In the markets, this is widely seen as a warning shot, a clear signal that direct coordinated action could be right around the corner, exactly what the theory predicts for phase 3.
So let's step back for a second. If this whole speculative theory is even partially correct, what does that actually mean? What are the real-world consequences for the markets and for all of us?
Well, the end game could be a massive seismic shift in global money flows. All that capital that was funneled into US big tech through the carry trade would be forced to flee. That money would have to find a new home, and it would likely rotate into international stocks and emerging markets, places that would actually benefit from a weaker US dollar.
So as we watch all of this unfold, the question we're left with is a pretty big one. Is all this market chaos just random noise? Or are we actually witnessing the first moves of a quiet, carefully planned restructuring of the entire global financial order, happening right out in the open but hidden in plain sight? The signals are flashing. Now we just have to wait and see what happens next.